بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. This is the fourth and the last of the series that we're giving here on the Fitrah, the natural disposition, the nature of human beings. Last week we talked about the verse Sibghat Allah, the baptism of God. And we noticed in that the word baptism comes from immersion, and all the words associated with it among Arabs, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and other people, they pertain to immersion. And in the case of some of those words, it also includes the concept of dyeing, of dyeing a cloth, because of the fact that when cloths are dyed, they're immersed. And therefore, this likeness of the fitrah, because Sibghat Allah is one of the references to fitrah, likens the fitrah to the dyeing of cloth, the coloring of cloth, and the beautiful coloring of cloth, so that it indicates that this cloth is beautiful, that the fitrah, the natural disposition of human beings, is beautiful, and therefore it's also an ornament for us to wear. And it is the greatest ornament that we have when we go out into the world. And because it is dyed in us like color in the cloth that you're wearing, then it permeates the entirety of your being. Nothing is left out. We also saw that the way this verse is situated in the Quran in its context, it's as if it were to say that the baptism of the people of the book, which is both Christians and Jews, as you know, they both baptize, comes through the mediation of men. But the baptism of God comes to us directly from God. And that's by virtue of the fitrah. And we notice also that the expression Sibghat Allah, the baptism of God, is like Fitrat Allah, the fitrah of God. And here the association of it with God is to show great honor and to show that it is something extremely praiseworthy and it's something extremely valuable. We looked after that at the verse where God says that He has created us fi ahsani taqweem, that He has created the human being in the best of all statures. And we emphasized the fact that we have to pay attention to the oaths at the beginning of the surah. وَالتِّينِ وَالزَّيْتُونِ وَطُورِ سِينِينَ وَهَذَا الْبَلَدِ الْأَمِينَ. The oaths are, of course, an emphatic affirmation, and they also indicate that what is talked about is a fact. It is a literal fact. But also, there is an indication here that this emphasis is needed. And the reason for that is that human beings generally live contrary to their natures. In fact, they generally violate their natures when they live. So although they're created, every single one of them, so they can be the highest of the high, the way they live often is like the lowest of the low. And therefore, when we look at the way that human beings misbehave through history, we may have a very negative view of them and of their humanity. And yet Allah is saying, but that's not the way they were created. So it's not their nature to be that way. Their nature is very, very different. Taqweem, as we saw, is a rich word that has many different implications and indications. One of them is that God has made us to stand erect. So it refers to the stature that we have, that qawwamana, so that we look forward and we don't look at the ground. most other creatures, as the Quran says in 67:22, are created with their faces stooped down. But we have been given a different stature. We look forward, we look up, we look down as we like. We have been given proportion, beauty, harmony, and balance. That's also there in the word taqweem. And we emphasize the fact that this taqweem takes in our outward self and our inward self as well. And it also indicates, because it is ahsanu taqweem, that there is complete compatibility, there's complete tawafuq between our outward self and our inward self. Finally, we also said that this verse indicates that the taqweem of human beings is unique to them. No other created being shares that with us. And also, as they point out, it means that the fitrah has the highest degree of istiqamah. It has the highest degree of uprightness and of salama, of soundness. Therefore, if human beings were to act consistently with their natures, and if they were to be free of negative outside influences, they and all they do would be characterized by the highest degree of istiqamah and salama. Okay, and then we ended yesterday by talking about two fundamental distinctions that human beings have. The first of those is that we are totalities. And no other creature is a totality. And we mean by that that all other creatures are part of the whole that makes up the world and the universe that God has created. But you represent the whole itself. And that's because of the fact that all of God's names, His creative names that are manifested in creation, they are all manifested in you. And all of God's attributes, or God's primary lordly attributes, are also manifested in you. So this makes you a totality. And this also means that you are the little world. And the world out there is the greater world. You are the microcosm and it is the macrocosm. The second distinction is the fact that all other created beings have fixed courses and fixed stations. Maqamun ma'loom. The angels are that way. And everything else is that way. Any animal, any bird, any plant, it has a particular way of being, of flowering, of giving fruit. It has certain requirements, and they're the same. And a cat is always a cat. The dog is a dog, and so forth. But the human being is not that way. And this is again because of the fact that the human being has this ahsan taqweem, the best of all statures. So other creatures don't swerve from their natures. Their natures and their species hold them to be a particular way. But human beings have no fixed station, and therefore we are indefinable. And we are not one thing, and we are not one way. And therefore, human beings are mysteries, and their ultimate stations are unknown. But for each of us, then, the critical consideration is that of process, of how do you live, where are you going, how are you developing yourself, what is the station that you will seek, what is the station that you will attain. So now we want to come tonight in the book to pages 102 to 117. And this is from Surah Ash-Shams, which is the 91st Surah, verses 7 through 10. Right, on page 102. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. By the soul and the one who fashioned it, and inspired it as to what makes it iniquitous, that's one translation, or reverent, who gave it its ilham of fujur, of iniquity, of wrongdoing, and also of taqwa. Indeed, he prospers who purifies it, and indeed he fails who obscures it. So, the one who fashioned it, وَمَا سَوَّاهَا, means the one who created the soul sound and well proportioned, as it was in the original primordial nature, the fitrah. So when God creates you here, He creates you in accordance with that fitrah that He gave you in the very beginning. And so this is consistent with the verse in Surah Rum 30:30, فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. This is a call in this surah for us to think about the true nature of the human being, our own true nature. Again, because as we saw in the surah that we just talked about, At-Teen, God created you in the most beautiful form. He created you in the most beautiful stature. And this is another way of saying that. The invocation of the soul, وَنَفْسٍ, or the oath by the soul, comes in a series of polarities, of opposites, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا, and so forth. So it comes in a series of polarities, of opposites or contraries. And commentators say that this implies that the human soul has inherent duality. You have in you inherent duality, which fluctuates between the inspiration you were given that gave you the knowledge of evil and the knowledge of good. This duality is seen by many also in the pair that we have of the soul at peace, and nafs al-mutma'inna, which is in control of its lusts and its passions and its desires, and has attained certainty. And then the soul that commands to evil, and nafsul ammara. And then also that intermediate station between the two, which is an-nafsul lawama, the self-deprecating soul, or the blaming soul. So this verse that we're talking about in Surah Ash-Shams, the commentators link this with that fundamental verse in Rum, verse number 30, Fitrat Allah. So they say that this nafs is perfectly proportioned in form because it is made hanif, inclining towards the truth and away from evil. And therefore it is a soul that is balanced, sawiya, and upright, mustaqima. And it has the straight fitrah, fitratul qawima. It is therefore nafsun sharifa. It is a noble soul that you have. And that nafsun sharifa is nafsun mukallafa. It is a soul that has been charged with moral and legal and ethical obligation. These verses in Surah Shams, are among the most illustrious revealed texts establishing the supreme greatness of the fitrah. Again, because God's made so many oaths about them, including the soul itself. And as you know, God only makes oaths to emphasize and to show that the thing is literally fact and true, but also to show that it is mu'azzam, it is illustrious and preeminent. So that verse indicates that the nafs mukallafa is among the most amazing things that God has created. And that this nafs is something God can duly make an oath by. And therefore it comes as a proof pointing to God's greatness, and it constitutes one of the most noble, that this soul constitutes one of the most noble things that He has created. Commentators link this verse with many other verses. For example, in al-Dhariyat 51:20 through 21. Upon the earth there are signs for those possessing certainty, and within your own souls. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ. Do you not then behold? Okay, so this nafs is this sign of God in you that you should look at and you should think about and contemplate. They also associated with Surah Al-Balad, the land, 90, 8 through 10. Did we not make for him 2 eyes? أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْن وَلِسَانًا وَشَفَتَيْن. And we made a tongue and 2 lips, and guide him upon the 2 highways. وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ. And we guided him along the 2 highways. The 2 highways are, of course, metaphors, but it's said to mean that they are the paths of good and the paths of evil, the highway and the low way. And there is a hadith in which the Prophet said, peace be upon him, O people, there are only 2 highways, the highway of good and the highway of evil. Do not make the highway of evil more beloved to yourselves than the highway of good. Commentators also link this verse in this surah of Surah Shams with Surah Al-Infitar, the cleaving asunder, which is number 82, and the verses 6 through 7. O mankind, O humankind, what has deluded you with regard to your noble Lord, who created you and then fashioned you and then proportioned you? Similar references in all cases. And all of them indicating the perfection of the fitrah. And of course the verse we just had, that we created the human being in ahsani taqweem. And then also they refer to the hadith that we looked at on the first day, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ, that every child is born completely on this fitrah. In Surah Shams, the word nafs is nakira. It is indefinite, doesn't have the definite article. So it's not one nafs, it's one nafsin. And this indefinite reference to it implies multiplicity. It's lil kathra and universality. So it applies to all souls. However, many commentators understand it in terms so general that they go beyond the human being to include the jinn as well. So this is one of the cases where the dalil of fitrah is also said to take in the jinn. That their nafs is also sawiyya, and that they also have a good fitrah. They weren't created evil. And they're also given the knowledge of good and the knowledge of evil. So the nafs here refers to the human soul, that's the way we translate it, But we can also say it refers to al-Dhat al-Insani, which is to say that it doesn't refer to a particular part of you or a particular dimension of you. It refers to the totality of you, inwardly and outwardly. Your hands, your feet, your head, your eyes, your heart, everything about you. All outer aspects as well as inner aspects. Even the way we stand, even the way we eat, the way we speak, and so forth. And it refers also to the different gifts we're given, like hearing and seeing and imagination, the power of speech, the power to organize, to do tadbir, to think, to remember, to know and to understand. So all of that too is part of this taswiyah. Commentators sometimes say that the inward aspects of the human nafs are actually much greater than the outward ones. The outward ones are beautiful and they are praiseworthy, but the inward dimension of man is much, much greater, and that's where his secret lies. This verse also indicates that God created the human soul, prepared with the preparation and everything it needs to attain the furthest limit and highest degree of all perfection. In the surah, Allah says, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. God inspired the soul to know its fujur, its iniquity, and also its taqwa, its reverence. So, this means that God taught the soul the nature of evil and good. And it's again like the two highways that we mentioned before. However, ilham, which is inspiration, is itself always positive. It is never negative. So therefore, it's not that God taught us evil to make us evil, but He taught us evil so that we understand it completely, that we have the capacity to know it, to recognize it, and to work against it. He didn't give us an inclination to follow it. Also, they say God instilled the knowledge of good and evil in every human soul before the coming of prophetic revelation. So when prophetic revelation comes to you and it tells you what is good and what is bad, you already know that instinctively. It's simply bringing out in you and emphasizing what you already know. Ilham, this inspiration, is said to be al-aslu al-jami' fi kulli naw'in min anwa' al-ilm. So this inspiration that God gave you, this is the basis upon which we acquire every type of knowledge that we have. That God gave us in this ilham access to every type of knowledge. Again, the role of the prophets and the messengers in this is one of bayan. It is one of clarification. It is one of emphasis. It is one of takmeel, of perfection. But they don't teach you something that you had no awareness of at all. They come to teach you about you. They come to bring out from you what is good in you. Just like if you took a rose and crushed it to get rose water. Okay, the rose water was already in the rose. Or if you dig a well to get water, the water's got to be down there in order to bring it up. So they dig the well. They crush the rose. They bring out the rose water. Were it not that the foundations of all knowledge are laid down within us by this divine ilham, leading to our perception of al-ma'qulat, the things we know by intellect, like the part is smaller than the whole, and the things we know by knowledge, ma'lumat, human beings would not have been capable of understanding and accepting the laws and principles that the prophets and messengers called them to. Did you follow that? Because that's an extremely important point. If you were indeed a blank state, if you were indeed a blank slate, there was nothing in you, and then all of a sudden you began to see, oh, what is that? A tree. Okay, what is that? A bird. Oh, I never knew that before. If that is the way that you were, and you didn't already have in you a fundamental knowledge, you would not be capable of knowledge. And it's because of the fact that God put that knowledge in us that we are truly capable of it. This is what we believe. But this is a profound belief. And this is also an extremely excellent philosophical position, especially in the light of the fact that in Cartesian dualism, which is the dominant paradigm of modern thought, you can never know the world outside of you for sure. You're just sort of guessing at it. There are probabilities. And this is because it's believed that there is a complete division between you as the thinker or the perceiver and the world that's outside of you. And there's no bridge between them. This is what we call Cartesian dualism. And for this reason, some people who criticize it, like the great thinker Wolfgang Smith, he says that and he's a physicist, by the way, and a mathematician, but he says that modern physics doesn't believe in red apples. Okay, and what it means is that modern physics cannot posit, it cannot affirm that the red apple exists out there objectively the way that we perceive it in our minds. And it's simply an issue of probability, that in all probability, and the highest probability, there is a molecular structure out there, like other molecular structures similar to it, that you make into an apple. In other words, you perceive it as an apple. You perceive it as a red apple. How does it actually exist out there in the objective world where no one knows? Okay, and that is a huge problem, because ultimately it means we don't know anything. We're always stabbing in the dark. Okay, and that's not the way we believe. And our position is prophetic belief, but also it is a supremely excellent philosophical position. You see, that you can know the world because you already do know it. And again, as we said before, you are the little world. Nothing is out there, but that it's also in you. And this is why in traditional Islamic sciences, we study the things we study. Water, mercury, salt, the embryo, botany, whatever it might be, in order to learn about us. And in order for us, in knowing about us, to know about it. This is what we call the microcosmic, macrocosmic relationship. We have that. In fact, most traditional people have that. So it means that you have a kinship relationship with everything outside of you. And it means that you can actually know what you know. There's no question about it. You know the apple. You think you do, but you really do. Okay, so this is very, very important. Again, just to read what I said before. Were it not for this ilham, by which you receive the knowledge of everything you have, if these foundations were not laid down within you, which are the basis of your perceiving, ma'qulat, which are things we know by intellect, like 1 + 1 is 2. The part is lesser than the whole. 1 is an odd number. 4 is an even number. Those are ma'qulat, and they're very, very many. And the ma'lumat, the different things we learn, like, birds make nests in trees and stuff like that. You know that already by ilham. You're already familiar with this world you see. You're already able to receive words that tell you about it. So if it were not for this, then human beings would never have been capable of understanding the world. They never would have been capable of studying the world. You can't just figure it out. And also they would not have been able to accept the teachings and the guidance and the laws of the prophets and the messengers that they called them to. So that's a really important point. And there must be a relationship like this between the outward and the inward, the world outside of you and the world inside of you, in order for the knower and the known to relate to each other properly. Okay, there must be a relationship between the knower and what the knower knows. Otherwise, the knower cannot know. The knower cannot have that knowledge. Okay, so we have a heart center. You have this qalb, this lub, that is extremely capable of knowledge. Again, what does it mean for the soul to be well proportioned? Let me go through that, and we'll repeat some of the things we said before. The taswiyah of the nafs, this proportioning of the nafs, refers to its being fashioned to receive good and evil, to know evil and good. That's part of it. That's part of its duality also. For it is open to receive the divine ilham totally, which includes the depravity of evil, the falsehood of evil, and the goodness of reverence and taqwa. So that's part of that taswiyah, that you do know evil, you can know evil, and therefore you can fight against it. You can protect yourself from it. You don't know it so that you can do it. You could do that too. But that would be a violation of the fitrah. This taswiyah happens at the time that the fetus is created in the womb and brought to its completion. Then the qualities of these powers increase after birth as you grow, especially after you come into contact with other human beings, your mother, your siblings, your father, your family, and then the world around you, the birds and things like that. So these qualities are there, put in you as a fetus in the mother's womb. Then they grow after that. They become better and better and better. And the ilham continues, because everything we know is by that ilham. So, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا, you have there, of course, the Arabic fa, and fa, waw, thumma, these are huruf al-atf, they are conjunctions, you put things together. And so it's said that the fa al-atf, the fa of conjunction here, indicates that the ilham comes about in the wake of the taswiyah. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا. So here the fa indicates that the ilham comes about immediately after the taswiyah. Ilham, again, I hope you don't mind if I repeat this. Maybe there's something here I didn't say before. Hope you don't mind my reading to you. It's really boring, isn't it? But otherwise, I've got nothing to say. I'm a reader. That's what I do. I'm a good reader, I hope. Okay? But again, ilham is only used for what is good. It's never used for what is bad. So even though evil is what we're talking about, there's nothing evil in this act. It doesn't make you evil. Ilham is a word that conveys precise indications. How are you tonight? Assalamu alaikum. Good to see you, Sidi Ali. And they say, ilham is huduthu ilmin fi nafsi bi ghayri dalilin khariji. That's what we say. Ilham, al-ilhamu huduthu ilmin fi nafsi bi ghayri dalilin khariji. So ilham is a way that God originates, or He creates, huduth, knowledge in the soul without any outward indication, without any outward guide or proof. Okay, so you don't see something and know. It's put in there even before you can see. That is, it is without experience of the external world, or the social world, or the linguistic world. And it is also prior to education. But it will be the basis of all experience and all education. So when you experience things, you know that world already. You can organize that world. You can put it in order. You can understand it properly. Many of you know how valuable that position is. And those of you who may not know that, please make a note of it. This is a treasure. And this is something that modern thought has lost completely over the last 400 years. And many of them know that. They know that this is a huge dilemma, but what way out? How do you get out of it? By ilham, God gave the nafs the knowledge, the ma'rifah of the path of fujur and the path of taqwa. Also, not just what they are, but how to do them, how to get there. What is the course of action that leads to it? Because you need to know that. You can't be a babe in toyland. You can't be naive, and you're not naive. You were not created that way. God also gave the nafs the power by which it could earn either one of the two. So you're able to do that as well. You're able to be evil because you know it, and you're able to be good because you know it too. Again, to repeat what I said, this ilham is said to be the foundation of all idrak, daruri. That means of all necessary knowledge, all immediate knowledge, like 1 + 1 is 2. And all principial knowledge, the principles, the first truths that we based all of our thought on. And it begins with such basic things as the baby's knowing how to seek its mother's breast to nurse. Doesn't have to be taught that, does it? The baby knows that immediately. How to seek out the mother's breast and how to nurse. And that's from this ilham also. The baby also has a sense from the very beginning to avoid what is painful and to seek what is pleasurable, and ultimately to avoid what is harmful and to seek what is beneficial. Of course, they have to be helped in that, they have to be trained. But again, they don't come into the world as what in Western thought was called tabula rasa, meaning a blank slate. They're not that way. And if were that way, nothing would happen. God gave the soul understanding and intellection of the beauty of good also. Not just the content of good and the path of good, but that good is beautiful, and good is truth, and good is something that makes you happy. And it gave it the knowledge of the ugliness of evil and the wretchedness of the person who follows it. Okay, now we'll finish this verse bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. So, God answers his oath. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. So God, this is the answer to the oath, so this is very important, isn't it? And so by answering this oath, God promises us that we will have falah, we will have success if we purify this nafs, if we keep it the way it's supposed to be, if we preserve it from being corrupted or being neglected, you will succeed. All you have to do is attend to yourself. Attend to this great gift that was given you, and that it will grow, and that the good that is in it, that is stored in it, will come out. Okay, so all you have to do is take the right course, and you know that course as well. You'll be taught that. How do you purify yourself? But in fact, you know that already instinctively. But again, it's like the rose water that's in the petal. You've got to crush it to get it out. You know, it's like the oil that's in the olive. You've got to crush it to get it out. It's like the water that's down under the earth. You have to dig the well to bring it up. And God warns us of the great loss of anyone who demeans the nafs, which is ironically what most people do, isn't it? And who reduce it to deficiency, and who hide away its glorious nature. Dassaha. So dassaha is hiding away. They obscure it, that was the translation. But it means that they hide away its glorious nature in kufr, or in disobedience, or in ignorance, or in deviation. So tazkiyah then is the formula for the multiplication of good. The purification of your soul is the formula for the multiplication of good. And das, which is related to dassaha, is the word dassa, yadussu in Arabic, which is not actually the verb, but they are related. So we can look at it, means to force something into something where it doesn't belong, where it doesn't fit. Dassa. You know, it's to force something into something else. You know, like, you know, a circle into a square or something like that. You force it into a place where it doesn't belong. And always it involves ikrah, making the thing do what is not its nature, what it doesn't want to do. So dassaha here means to come between the nafs and the good that it was created to do. You come between that. وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. And anyone who does that will come to perdition. You will fail. Again, our scholars say, all of this shows that the asl, the foundational truth in the nafs is salah, is goodness, right? And khair. And that evil is an exception to the rule. Evil is an exception to the rule. Evil comes about by virtue of doing things that are contrary to your very nature. But once we do it, it's difficult, and it gets easier every time. Okay? It's also said, you know, that existence is good and that evil has no place in that existence as such. That evil, in other words, is psychotic. Evil is something that pertains to the psyche. Evil is something that is inside of us, in the drama of ourselves. But it's not actually in the world out there. It's not actually in the trees or the birds or the water, even in the storms and the things like that. That evil is privation. Evil is negation. It has no ontological root, but good is not that way. Existence is good. God created a world that is good also, just as He created a soul that is good. And this world that we're in to be tested can be the scene where evil takes place, but that's not its nature either. Now we'd like to look at the verse, Al-Dhariyat, which is surah number 51, verse number 56. And in your book, we'll go back to page 71. Okay, so this is the verse. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Okay, so this is also one of the dalils of Fitrah. That this is what God, this is your Fitrah. God created you to worship. فَذَكِّرْ, God says, and remind, for truly the reminder benefits the believers. I did not create the jinn and the human beings save to worship me. To worship me, God says that. So this means that God did not create us just to seek out our sustenance, like a lot of animals. All day long, they're looking for food. They're eating, they're grazing, they're looking for food. But God did not create the human being like that. Again, you are a unique creation. Rather, God created you for Him. And He also tells us that He created this world for us. We're, of course, supposed to be vigilant in this world, stewards in this world. We're supposed to take care of it. We're not supposed to harm it. We're supposed to also make it a paradise for the animals. Your paradise is in the next world, but this world is supposed to be a paradise for animals. You don't harm them. You don't mistreat them. You give them the kind of food they're created to eat, and so forth. But, you know, you are created in this world, you know, to worship God and to submit to Him, to remember God. This points to the purpose for which human beings were created, even if most of them do not fulfill this function. In a hadith Qudsi, the Prophet says that God says, "Son of Adam, dedicate yourself to worshipping me. Tafarragh li'ibadati. Dedicate yourself to worshipping me, and I will fill your chest with riches and make your poverty dissipate. Otherwise, I will fill your chest with distractions and will not make your poverty dissipate." The verse expands then on the command, flee to God. Firru, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ, which is in the same surah. فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. توجه إلى الله. You know, we turn to God. You know, that's something that we do sort of on our own terms, in the way we want to. Do a little bit of that, do a little bit of this. Maybe tonight you might get up to pray. Okay, that's tawajjuh. But firru ilallah is when you've got to, when you have no choice. It's an urgent matter. It's an emergency. You know, you can't take your time about it. You have to do it immediately. So they say this is also connected with that. فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Flee unto God. As everything else in which one seeks refuge distracts the human being from their true purpose. But God is your true purpose, so flee unto Him. Human beings are not created for this world alone, but for this one and the next. Ibn Abbas has a very famous commentary for the verse, and that is that وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, meaning إِلَّا لِيَعْرِفُونَ. This is an old tafsir, going back to the days of the Prophet. So he says, I did not create them, but that they know me, that they have ma'rifah of me. Which is to say that, therefore, the ibadah is not really an end in itself, but the ibadah is a means to the end. And the end is to know God. But how do we know God? Do we know God by reading books, or studying philosophy, or by sitting in an armchair or thinking? We know God by submission to Him and worshiping Him in the way that He has ordained. But the purpose is to know Him. The purpose is to come to know God, which is the greatest gift of all. These verses respond to those who have deviated from the fitrah of worship. These verses come in the context of that. They mention God's blessings upon His servant, and that He has created human beings with fitrahs, with bodies, with senses and intellects inclined towards worship. So also this is one of the verses that they use to say that in your fitrah also is not just the knowledge of God, but it's also the desire to worship Him. This verse is also related to al-Hujurat. Truly the most noble of you in God's sight are those who have the greatest taqwa. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. For the people with the greatest taqwa are also those who are the most perfect in worship and the most sincere in the deeds they perform. If we were to say that the purpose of water is to drink it and purify ourselves with it, then pure water would be the best, because these benefits in it are more complete. And with that, I'll take a drink of water. Okay? Of course, the fitrah that's referred to here includes the jinn. And we've seen that in other cases, and I've told you about that. It is said that the jinn were mentioned first because of the great interest that the pre-Islamic Arabs took in them. And also because the pre-Islamic Arabs often worshipped the jinn. So it's emphasizing that the jinn were commanded to do the same thing you were commanded to do, which is to worship God. Thus God indicated to them that their ma'bud, the thing they worship, the jinn, were by nature worshippers of God, just like human beings, and like the very human beings that worship them. The verse also indicates the asala of worship, that is our first and foremost purpose, and that is our highest station. So, it's often said about human beings that we are the religious animal, homo religiosus. We don't find human beings in history, but that they are doing some kind of worship. It might be correct, it might be wrong, but we are a species of worshippers. And this is something that the book also talks about later on. Human beings have got to worship. They have got to have religion. This is an instinctive need in them that is one of the strongest of all of the needs that they have. And therefore we see that in the 20th century, which was the most secular of all centuries and the most atheistic of all centuries, that in that century too you have this phenomenon of secular alternatives to religion, that even secular ideologies like communism and fascism, they had to present themselves in a quasi-religious form in order to get the attention of the people. It can't just be talk, it can't just be ideas, it cannot just be their interest. That they have to present their secular philosophy in a religious way. So this is again a reflection of this fact that we are created to worship, and that is deeply instilled upon us. Let's look now at verse 3 of Surah Az-Zumar, 39, which is in your book on page 86. ألا لله الدين الخالص والذين اتخذوا من دونه أولياء ما نعبدهم إلا ليقربونا إلى الله زلفى إن الله يحكم بينهم فيما هم فيه يختلفون إن الله لا يهدي من هو كاذب كفار. This is also said to be one of the dalils of Fitrah. Behold, unto God belongs the pure religion, and those who take protectors apart from Him, they say, we do not worship them, save to bring us nigh in nearness unto God. Truly God will judge between them regarding that about which they differ. Truly God does not guide one who is disbelieving and false. Khalis, pure, carries the connotations of sincerity and devotion. The attributes of devotion and purity imply that God requires that religion be devoted entirely to Him. Ad-Dinul Khalis. It's for Him and no one else. So that obedience to Him be total, and that obedience to Him be purified of any defects. Sincerity and purity of devotion are the primary characteristics, then, of all devotional acts. In this verse, the idolaters, it's a verse directed towards the idolaters, recognize that there is a power greater than themselves. Okay, and why do they recognize that? Because it's in their fitrah. Just as the pre-Islamic Arabs had the habit of saying, لبيك اللهم لبيك لبيك لا شريك لك لبيك إلا شريكا هو لك. So they would say the same thing we say. I am doubly responding to your call, O Lord. I am doubly responding to your call. You have no partner except for a partner that you own. إلا شريك هو لك. So they know this instinctively. That's why they say this is also one of the proofs of fitrah. And as we mentioned before, great studies of so-called primitive religions were carried out in the 20th century. Wilhelm Schmidt is the best of those. And he basically devoted his life to that. But he showed that whenever you find so-called primitive people, which are actually micro societies, micro religions, they're people who live isolated and in kinship groups. They always believe in one God. There's no exception to that. They're not animists. They believe in one God, and they have many ancient words for that God and for His beauty. They may venerate ancestors and heroes. That's very common with them. And they may believe that that great God is at a distance, or they may believe that He doesn't care about them. and that others do. But they don't have pantheons of gods. They don't have that. That comes later. So primitive people are not that way. And no doubt that is an indication of ancient prophecy. That's what Wilhelm Schmidt himself believed. But it's also an indication of their fitrah, that this is the way they're created. And the pre-Islamic Arabs are very much in that pattern, aren't they? Because they believe in Allah, who is the great creator God, he who is worshipped by right. But then they came to associate other gods to him, and they basically knew that it wasn't right. So they recognize God as this great power. And they also recognize they're falling short of pure devotion to him by worshiping many gods. Yet they want to have it both ways. So they say, we do not worship them except to bring us closer to God in nearness. But since this is not the pure religion, ad-dinul khalis, God will not guide them, and they will be forsaken, and their deities also will bring them no good. Right? This verse is therefore related also to the one that we just had, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. So this verse indicates, like that one, that human beings have a natural inclination to worship. We know our Maker by our natures. And this fitrah is also associated with a desire to worship, even though that worship might not be correct. So we are worshippers, even if it might be a secular religion. Even when we are mistaken in the way that we go about this worship, it's still part of our nature. Yet those who are mistaken justify their worship as a means of worshiping God, the Lord of the worlds. This was certainly the case with the idolatrous Arabs, and you can find that in many people. The idolatrous Arabs justified their worship of different gods and idols in this manner: to worship the great God, to use them as a means to come to him. Again, this shows that all of them were born on that pact, the primordial covenant, and that God's lordship is imprinted upon them, even though they worshipped gods other than God, and even though that wasn't accepted. So man is necessarily a worshipper who either worships what is true and is benefited by that, or he worships what is false and he is harmed by that, but he is inescapably a worshipper. The verse also indicates that God's true religion is al-Hanifiyya, the religion of Abraham. The verse indicates that the religion of God is that deen khalis, the pure religion, is void of shirk and void of any foreign admixtures. It is the Hanifiyya of La ilaha illallah, which is the fitrah, and it is that which we have been commanded to give ourselves to entirely. Therefore, shirk, as we've seen, is contrary to the fitrah, even though the person who does it will seek to justify it by interpreting it as a manifestation of the principle of God's lordship, as established by the fitrah. This verse also shows that the knowledge of God and faith in him flow from the fitrah, but that the fitrah may not be enough. So also prophetic guidance has to come in for us to rectify that and to set it correct. So the fitrah has to be complemented by other teaching and by other guidance. And this is because hawa, self-will, will set in and it will distort the fitrah and direct it away from what it truly knows. Now, there are a number of other verses. I don't think I'm going to go through them, but in your book you have from page 185 to 238, there's a discussion of a lot of these other verses, and you can look at that if you like. These verses also indicate that we were created with the knowledge of God, and that we were created to worship Him. If you ask them who created the heavens and the earth, they will say God. So this is something instinctive in us. The question, is there another God alongside God? Ilahun ma'allah. Then we also see human beings turning back to God in their times of utter distress. So they in that distress, they find their fitrah, they turn to it. And also you have on page 230 to 238, the story of Pharaoh, who himself, at the moment of his death, he turns back to his Lord. So these are all indications of that. Let's conclude with that then. And let's just say a few of the things, sum up some of the things we've said about the fitrah. The fitrah is the fitrah of God, fitrat Allah. So therefore, it is something very noble and very praiseworthy. The fitrah, as we said, constitutes everything about you. So each animal has its own fitrah, and the fitrah is the special order, or the nizam, according to which God created each thing. However, you alone have a fitrah which is so amazing and so beautiful that it is associated with God, the Creator Himself, Fitrat Allah. The fitrah is the fitrah that is specific to the human being, refers to God, how God has created the human being in body, spirit, heart, and intellect. It includes the human's way of walking on 2 feet. That it includes the bodily fitrahs that we talked about in the very beginning. For a human to try to eat right or to do things other than walk or run with his feet would be contrary to our bodily fitrah. To be able to deduce al-musabbabat, the effects from their causes, al-asbab, this is also part of your fitrah. And the conclusions from the premises of arguments, this is also the fitrah. To try to deduce a matter from something other than its cause would be contrary to your fitrah, or contrary to the intellect that God gave you with it. Our certainty that the things we see are established realities. You know, that these are haqa'iq thabita. This is also fitrah. And as you saw tonight, that's also because they're in you as well. You are recognizing them out there, and you know that they're real. They are real in you, and they are real out there. There's no question about them. It's insanity, in fact, to question that they exist. So the sophistical denial of the reality of existing things, or denial that they exist, or doubt about that, that is something fundamentally contrary to human nature. The tashri'at and the tafari' of Islam, the basic legal rulings of Islam and the deductions from them, are either matters of fitrah, also in the sense that they are in accord with what the intellect perceives and bears witness to as true, or they are things the soundness of which the fitrah does not deny. All of the mu'amalat of Islam go back to the fitrah, and it bears witness to the fact that they bring masalih, and it wants those masalih, and that they enable us to avoid mafasid, and we don't want those mafasid. So people are perfectly created, and this fitrah is extremely rich and extremely good, and this is the purpose of our existence, to bring it to its fullest completion. As we said yesterday, our proper aspiration is to perfect what we are, and the human being is that creature who's capable of everything and also of nothing. So let's stop there, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, and inshallah we can take questions. How can I constantly, what is this? Is Sidi Hisham here?
Yes.
This, what is this right here? How can I constantly asbah? What does that mean? Die?
Die my heart.
Okay, I think this question is, how can I constantly isbah my heart with God's light? Especially when I lose motivation and the challenges in life become harder to bear. So you don't dye your heart with God's light. God's light is dyed into your heart. It's already there. What you have to do is polish it. You have to get into it. You have to return to it. And you do that by the purification of your soul. So you do that by living the good life, by keeping the good company, by learning the truth and living by it. And it's very important to note, as we saw over the last few days, that that is easy to do. It is not difficult to do. And even though it would seem in this time and this society that we live in that this is something impossible, that's not the case. There is nothing easier than for you to become what you were created to be. And it's melancholy and melancholic literature and being drawn to it in opposition to our fitrah. First of all, I think that whoever wrote the question should be given credit for using the word melancholy, right? Like, that's a nice word. And we used to use that word all the time. But we don't use it today very much, do we? And today we talk about depression. And depression is very much a modern disease. And a disease that comes from a social order that is unnatural, and food that is unnatural, and knowledge that is not knowledge at all. And I don't know what this person means by melancholic literature. If they're here and they want to raise their hand and say they can. Did you write the question? What is melancholic literature? What do they mean by that?
She's the literature major.
Sorry?
She's the literature major.
So am I. You know, but we never had melancholic literature. I want to take melancholic literature 101. Yes?
Yeah, it's my question.
God bless you. Are you melancholic? Yeah. What did you have in mind?
No, I didn't use the specific expression melancholic literature. I'm drawn to it in literature. So whenever I read a poem talking about the feeling, I mentioned the poem in the question. The poem Ode to
Yeah, but this is typed out, so they didn't give me the poem.
No, it's okay. But I'm drawn to good expressions of it. I'm drawn to the feeling. I appreciate it. So my question is it in opposition to the fitrah to have that...
So you like to read sad poems?
Not that simple, but yeah.
You like to be made sad. And what is a sad poem?
No, it's not sadness specifically. It's
But melancholy is like that. Melancholy is sad.
It's similar to it, but it is. Yeah, I view it to be on a more profound level than just sadness.
If it's on a profound level, it must be good.
Longing, no?
Sidi Ali, what would you say about that?
Maybe he's talking about this longing for something that we miss, you know, this idea of...
Yeah, we wouldn't necessarily call that melancholy, though, would we?
It's difficult to define, but yeah.
Yeah, in any case, I think Keats has an ode to melancholy.
Yeah, that's the poem.
Yeah, is that the poem? Okay. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, one of the problems that we have as Muslims is the fact that we live in the past. And that's not necessarily melancholy, but we talk about how great we were and how many things that we did and the sciences that we created and the civilizations. And I don't think we do that in a melancholy way, but often that can be very disempowering. And it's very important for us to understand how and why were we able to do what we did and then do it again and do it better. So often the way that we think about the past, and this could be also at an individual level, can be very debilitating and very harmful because of the fact that, you know, it's like we live in the past and we need to live in the present. And, you know, we need to learn from the past so that we can use it for the present. The parts of the fitrah that are intellectual, are they only related to monotheism and tawheed, or are there other aspects of intellectual fitrah? What's the answer? What's the answer? Okay, so the question is, the parts of the fitrah that are intellectual, because we said that the fitrah also informs our intellect. And it gives us the knowledge of tawheed and the rejection of shirk. So the question is, are there other aspects of the fitrah that also pertain to the intellect? And the answer is, what is the answer? Who said yes? You got it right, so raise your hand, okay? And it should be yes, right? Because as we said, everything we know is by ilham. All of the ma'qulat we know, and of course the person who wrote this question wasn't in the lesson today, because this is from yesterday. So we're not blaming them, but as we said today, everything we know by aql, we know by fitrah. Mathematics, geometry, you know, cause and effect, all of these things are part of intellect. So the greatest thing that fitrah has in it is the knowledge of God and the knowledge of God's oneness. But it has in it everything else, even knowledge of good and evil, even knowledge of the course or the path that we have to follow to do good and evil. Okay, and we talked about that tonight a lot, and probably the person wouldn't have asked this question, you know, today, but they asked it yesterday. And as we said today, it's really important that everything out there is also in here, and that's why you can understand that world out there. That's why you have a kinship relationship with it and with everything in it. And in the Muslim past, all of our Islamic sciences were predicated on this proposition, whether it was chemistry or anything else. You know, Jabir ibn Hayyan, who is one of the greatest of all scientists and mathematicians in Islamic history, and he's one of the fathers of chemistry, and he lived in the days of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik in the 2nd century of the Hijrah. And he wrote over 100 works in chemistry. He's a great chemist. He has a book called Kitab al-Sab'in, the book of the 70. And it's about chemistry. And he begins with beautiful praise of God for pages. And then he talks about the need to purify the soul. And then he says something to the effect that if you don't praise God like this and you don't echo that, and if you don't understand the need to purify the soul, then there's no reason for you to study chemistry. See, because chemistry is going to be the discovery of your soul. It's going to be the discovery of yourself. It's going to be the discovery of, the greatness of God in the universe. And we went about these things in a way that is qualitatively very profound and very different. Even we look for male and female principle, in these things. The male principle is there in sulfur. And the female principle was there in mercury, for example. And this is not trivial. Everything that we know and everything that we intellect, it's also there in the fitrah. How do we understand human actions? Actually, it says here, humane actions in relation to the fitrah. What does that mean? You can come over here if you like. Does that mean, how do we know what is good and what is humane? How are you doing? That's it.
So the question was, how can we judge actions if they're humane, and are they all in accordance with the fitrah, or are there other acts that are humane that aren't in accordance with the fitrah?
Okay, thank you very much. You want to sit here? Faruq. As we know, the fitrah knows what is good, and it knows the path to goodness. It knows what is evil, and it knows the path to evil. It knows what is humane and what is inhumane. And if it were left with that, without outside influences, then it would only do what is humane. It would only do what is good. But because we can be led away from that, and we can be enculturated to do other things, then we have to have other standards that put us back in touch with ourselves and that affirm to us what is good and what is evil. And therefore the prophets come, peace be upon them, to teach us good and evil, and to teach us what is humane and what is not. But again, they teach it to you, and it's something you already knew. It's just you had to be reminded of it. Is that clear? And that's very important. So, and here again we said that the fitrah is not adequate by itself later on. You're given a fitrah which is supremely adequate. But then you're made to live in environments that will obscure it and that will direct you in other directions. So you have to be reminded, you have to be brought back to it. However, when you are brought back to it, then you know that this is right. This is the way that it ought to be. Okay, that's really, really important. And, you know, those of us who embraced Islam, I'm looking at my brother here, Abd-Allah from Holland, or his wife, Helen, and some of the others here, myself, you know, speaking for myself, and perhaps this is also true in your case, that when I became a Muslim, and you begin to study what Islam teaches, even how you're taught to pray and to fast, I know myself, my soul was always saying that that's the right way. That's the way it should be. Even standing in prayer, even bowing in prayer, even standing back up, even making sajda. I knew that this is right. You see, so it was amazing for me, because it's like every time I learned something new about my religion, my soul would affirm that this is natural, this is proper. And many converts have that experience, if not all converts have that experience. In fact, sometimes I would say that, why couldn't I have figured this out on my own? How could I have been led to believe something other than this? To tell another personal story, I grew up as a Christian, and we were practicing Christians. And I learned the church doctrine. I was taught by the preacher. And I was an acolyte. I'd light the candles and I'd put them out, and I did other things. And I'd light the candles, and then I'd go to the back of the church, and I would sit with my father at the very back, and I have to wait till the service is about over, and then I'll go back to the front to put out the candles. And that's usually what I'm worrying about. Will the candles go out or not? Because you have a little cup, you put it on them, and you pick it back up, it's still burning. And it's like, I can't break the candle, right? But you're going to have to go out. I can't leave you there, so I'm worried about that. But I remember I'd look at the preacher, the pastor, who was like a second father in many ways. I was very close to him. But as he would do the things he did, they have an altar, so he does things up in the front of the church. Churches are not all the same. You maybe have seen this. But I remember that I would have a feeling that I'm not getting something. You know, that there is a hollowness in my heart. There's an emptiness in my heart. And I know that it's not in his heart. And that's because he's doing all these amazing things at the altar. And he's going back and forth, and he's making certain motions and so forth. But I felt like, you know, you don't have that in your heart, I know. But I do in mine. That there's something here that is not quenched. And when I became a Muslim, which was many years later, but when I learned to pray, and especially to make the sajda, then that was filled. And I could feel it, like it's gone now. That now this fills me. So our fitrah responds to the religion. It responds to the worship. And it responds to, you know, the parameters of the law that are given to us. If someone believes in the first covenant, they believe in Tawheed, but was not delivered the message of Islam in a clear way, when they die, would they be judged on the first covenant like the children of Abraham? And our brother says, I believe the person is asking, is there a divine amnesty for those who have not been reached by the da'wah? So, very good question. God does no injustice to anyone. And in order for the person to have the obligation to accept the covenant of our Prophet, peace be upon him, which in many cases would be a third covenant, because many of the people would be Jews or Christians. So they already have a covenant, a second covenant. But for them to be bound by that third covenant of the final Prophet ﷺ, his teaching must be given to them in an absolutely truthful and convincing manner. We call that iqamatul hujjah. You have to establish the proof of God. You have to remove their doubts. You have to answer their questions. You have to create in them the emotional confidence that they have to have. So when they are denied that, then there is mercy in that for them. It's not the ideal situation, but you know, they have to know that what you are teaching is true. This is the reason why when the prophets come, they are the most beautiful of people. They are the most eloquent of people. And they answer all questions. And they set the best examples. And they come from the best parts of the best families, you know, of their tribes and people. So there's no reason to reject them. And they can only be rejected willfully, out of jealousy or out of rancor or for some other reason. So we won't talk about the amnesty because that's God's business. But leave God's business for Him, and don't be judging people. And especially in this time that we live in, it's no question that we have many enemies. And it's no question that there are people that are out there trying to destroy our religion every day on YouTube and, you know, in sermons and in many other ways. And this is very serious. What they do is really evil. But it is our obligation to make Islam known in its beauty and in a convincing way. And that's really difficult today. It's really difficult because you have so much to disprove, and you have a heavy burden upon you of proof. But that's the way it's got to be. The message has to be radiant. It has to be clear. And one of the best ways to do that is to create communities that embody that. Is that possible to do? Some people have done a pretty good job of it. And if you can do that, if even among ourselves we create a gathering in which we embody that truth, it has a tendency to attract people to it. It has a tendency to remove their doubt. I've seen that happen myself, you know, where there were communities that were representing the teaching, and there was brotherhood and sisterhood, and the community becomes the da'wah. And people say, I want to be part of you. I want to live the way that you live. I want to accept that teaching. What is the connection between fitrah and faith? What is the connection between fitrah and iman? Iman is fitrah. You know, the rudiments of that faith, the inclination towards that faith, the knowledge of the fundamental principles, they are ingrained in you. But again, they may have to be brought out. That's why if you read the book, you'll see that our scholars distinguish between al-iman al-fitri and al-iman al-shar'i. And there's a lot of discussion about that in the book. So, and even they will say that the iman al-fitri, you know, it's not enough in itself. It may be in certain situations, if that's all you've got. That's what you'll be judged by. But again, usually the iman al-shar'i has to come to complement and to clarify the iman fitri. Okay, but iman is part of fitrah. Some argue that humans left to their own designs in nature act like animals and become wild, and they don't search for their creator. How would you respond to this? Are you talking about the Lord of the Flies? Remember the Lord of the Flies? The movie and the book? You know, but the Lord of the Flies, you know, is, you know, it's like a story made up in which the person who wrote it is trying to exemplify what he believes about human beings. And what he believed about human beings is that they're basically evil. And if you saw the movie The Lord of the Flies, that was a long time ago, but see, it's about these English choir boys who are shipwrecked on an island. And in the beginning, they're like little choir boys, and they're singing Kyrie eleison, glory be to God in the highest. And they're so sweet and so beautiful, and in the end they're killing each other. And they're worshiping a pig's head, and they're doing all kinds of other evil things. So this was a statement of that author about what he thinks human nature is. But it's not a scientific study, right? This is just, what he believes, and then so he's going to write a story to try to show that to be the case. But we don't believe that. And again, if you were to take English choir boys and put them on an island, I don't know how they would behave. I mean, they might already be misbehaving a lot. But as we said, our belief is that the fitrah sawiyya is mustaqima and salima, such that if you could put us in a natural state where there are no negative influences, you won't find that because the demonic is everywhere, then everything would be mustaqim and everything would be salim. That's our worldview. Is the Quran the created word of God, or is it part of his infinite speech? Well, we talked about the speech of God, right? So you heard it directly. Alastu bi rabbikum. And you hear it again. Salamun qawlan min rabbir rahim. This is a big issue in theology. And we believe that divine speech is a divine attribute. And therefore, it is uncreated. And it is not letters, it is not words, it is not Arabic, it is not Hebrew. It doesn't have grammar. It is one. And it relates to everything God knows and expresses that perfectly. And the difference between his knowledge, which is the knowledge of everything, is that his knowledge shows, it reveals, without those things revealed ever being hidden. Whereas the speech points to what is known. So it indicates what is known. Otherwise, they're essentially the same. They have different functions. Now, God has therefore an uncreated speech, an eternal speech. And this is his attribute. This is his sifa. And then God has the tablet of light, in which he has the angels inscribe all that will be in this world. That speech that is in the tablet of light is created. And it is letters and words. And God reveals his uncreated speech through angels to prophets in the form of the Quran, or the Torah, or the Psalms, or the Gospel. But that uncreated speech is then made created speech. So Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is created speech. It's in time and space. Ba. Right? It's also Arabic. It's also grammatical. But God created it, and therefore it is perfectly created. And because it is perfectly created, it indicates to you the uncreated speech. And that's why we always say in theology, you have to be very correct in the way you talk about this. Because you don't want to break the link in Revelation between revealed speech, which is in time and place, and is created, and it's written in books, and that's creation, and between the uncreated speech that it represents. So this is very, very important. And therefore, when we talk about God's revealed speech, part of it is created, and that part that is created reflects perfectly the uncreated speech. And that's why we can say the whole Quran is in al-Fatiha. And the whole of the Fatiha is in the Basmala. And as some people said, the whole of the Basmala is in the Ba. And the whole of the Ba is in the dot underneath. And in fact, the word Quran means to bring together. It means Jama'. So you have Quran and you have Furqan. And they're the same thing, aren't they? But the Furqan spells it all out for you. It's very detailed. It's very clear. And the Quran is also very clear to you, but it contains in it infinite knowledge. And that's why Sayyidina Umar, God be pleased with him, would say that if I lost a camel's halter, I could find it in the Quran. Which surah? Where's the surah about the camel's halter? But he means that there are so many levels of knowledge in that book that if you enter it, you will be led to more and more knowledge. That's what we mean. And that's why also, when we live with the Quran, it's never boring. You don't get bored. If you are getting bored, then you're not reading it. You're just reciting it with your tongue, but your heart's not in it. Your mind's not in it. So you heard the uncreated word of God. Alastu bi rabbikum. But it's transmitted to us in revealed speech. Alastu bi rabbikum in Arabic. But you heard it uncreated. And therefore it's the most beautiful thing you ever heard. And it imprinted on your fitrah this incredible knowledge which is there, which is ethical and moral and aesthetic, of good and everything else. Thank you. This is important. Okay? Okay, so this is about, you referred to an-nafsul ammarati bis-su', the self-deprecating soul. Could you please elaborate on this? So we said that there is a duality in the soul, right? And that duality is in many things. It knows evil, it knows good. And we said that duality is also there in the difference between an-nafs al-ammara bis-su' and an-nafs al-mutma'inna. So those are two poles, and you have both of those instinctively in you. The nafs ammara bis-su' is the nafs that is the captive of its hawa, its self-will, its passion, and its shahwa, and its ghadab, and things like that. And it's dark. And this is the soul that we deprecate when we say, you know, I have problems with my nafs. Okay, so this is the nafs ammara that is commanding us to do the things we shouldn't do, and is essentially the servant of Satan in that. And then you have the nafs lawama. And the nafs lawama is the one that is now ashamed of the nafs ammara. And it is one of the signs of God, isn't it? لا أقسم بيوم القيامة ولا أقسم بالنفس اللوامة. God makes an oath by the day of resurrection, which is an immense event and a great thing. And then he makes an oath by the self-deprecating soul, and nafs al-lawama. Okay, so it's a great thing, because this is the one where our consciousness begins. This is the one where we begin to judge ourselves and to be vigilant with ourselves and not satisfied with what we do. The nafs ammara is always satisfied with you if you obey it, if you respond to it. And the nafs lawama is the one that now wants to respond to God's command, and it wants to hearken to its nature. And when it does that, then it rises up through self-purification and tapping into this great good that you have, so that it becomes the nafs mutma'inna, the nafs that is at peace with itself. And that's a great thing. And we're told that you can't stay in that intermediate stage. You know, it's very good that you're able to escape from the nafs ammara and to go to the nafs lawama. But you can't stay there. You've got to go up to the nafs mutma'inna. And there you're safe. And there you can stay. And if you stay with the nafs lawama, then you go back to the nafs ammara. In fact, that's often one of the characteristics of depression. That the person has that nafs lawama, that I shouldn't have done this, I'm no good, I've never done anything right, everything I do fails, and so forth. Why do I do this? Why do I say that? But then they fall into that, and they believe it, and there's no escape from it. So they're in a prison of depression, which is really the nafs lawama becoming nafs ammara. Wallahu alam. What does God's hands mean? Let's see here. Give me a minute here. Hands of God. Let me check that out. Okay, so. In any case, only Adam was created by God's two hands. We didn't talk about this, but I was going to. And since I got this question, I'm going to do it. Only Adam was created by God's two hands. And both of God's hands are said to be right, meaning that both of them are good. Both of them create good. God singled out Adam for creation with two hands, and only Adam, to honor him and to give him karama among all creatures and above all creatures. The two hands emphasize God's power and perfection in the creation of Adam. And so the hand of God is always associated with power. Just as your hand is associated with your ability to do, right? Because this hand, this amazing hand that you have, it has a thumb, the opposable thumb. If we didn't have opposable thumbs, we couldn't do anything. You know, the opposable thumb is what enables me to hold a hammer, or an axe, or something else, or a pen, you know, and to build buildings, and to chop down trees, and to do all sorts of other things. So the hand for us is absolutely associated with the ability to do things, isn't it? And God's hand is associated with His power. And it's not a hand like this. You know, it is whatever it is, but it's not a physical hand that has fingers like ours or so forth. But it's a figure of speech relating to something real about God, which is fundamentally associated with His power. And we say it's bila kayf. We don't make analogies about it. But the two hands emphasize God's power in Adam's creation, and that God created Adam without an intermediary. So just as you received the covenant without an intermediary, so also Adam was created directly by God, with no intermediary. There was no father, there was no mother. It alludes also to the diverse activities involved in Adam's creation. Abul Qasim al-Qushayri, he says about God's creating Adam with His two hands, what God deposited in Adam is not found in anyone else or anything else, so that God's special favor, His khususiyya, become manifest within him, within Adam. It also indicates that God undertook the creation of Adam by Himself. That Adam is that which His hands wrought. So that will be my answer. I wanted to say that, and I wanted to read it and I forgot to. In theology, we talk about these things: the eyes of God, the eye of God, the hands of God, the face of God. And these are called mutashabihat. They are called likenesses because they seem to make a likeness between God and creation. And therefore, that's one of the most important things in theology, that you're taught not to take them literally. Don't think that God has eyes like you, or that he has a face like you. Can dreams be considered signs from God, and to what extent? And the word here the person gives is ru'ya. So, you know, the true vision, the true ru'ya, is a piece of prophecy. And it's something given to people, believers and non-believers, Muslims and non-Muslims. Often the true ru'ya is given to people that are truthful. That's what it's an indication of, that they're truthful. And it's said also that towards the end of time, the true ru'ya will increase, so that God gives beautiful dreams to believers to strengthen them. And it is one of the signs of God. And it's an amazing thing. Maybe you see something that's going to be that comes about and you can't believe it. Comes about years later. So it can be a bishara. It can be, you know, good news. And it can be warnings and other things. You mentioned that the hadiths indicate we had human form in that first world. Actually, I didn't say that. We had human form when we were there at the covenant. Okay, and that's really like the end of the first world, or the beginning of the second world. Before that, we were also spirits. And how did we look there? I don't know. I can't say. Does that mean corporeal form? Well, yeah, it means that you looked like you look now. You had a face, you had eyes. Every one of them had a wabis, a radiant shining light on their forehead. So if that's what you mean by corporeal form, then that's what it was. But was it a biological body? Probably not. And God knows best. But, you know, we were very small, and the word dhar can mean ant, and it can mean seed, but we weren't seeds and we weren't ants. We were very small, and we looked like human beings. And you could see that this is David, and this is Jesus, and this is you. If so, how do we understand the hadith that indicates that the ruh of Isa was there? Well, what's the problem? Didn't Jesus also have a form? Wasn't he a human being? In any case, this is the hadith of Ubay ibn Ka'b. So he says that among those spirits was Jesus. And is there anything surprising about that? I like that hadith very much. It's a beautiful indication. But Jesus is also one of the children of Adam, isn't he? Yeah. So, can you try to influence someone with the intention of trying to get them in touch with their fitrah? What is this? Oh, that's okay. Can you purposely try to influence someone with the intention of trying to get them in touch with their fitrah? What do you think is a good answer to that? What would you say? Yeah.
Comes from God, not you.
What comes from God? The fitrah? The guidance. Inna alayna lal huda. Guidance is upon us. But, you know, isn't this what we're trying to do? That in coming together and being together, we're trying to make ourselves better. We're trying to bring ourselves into harmony with our fitras. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. When you call a person to Islam, you're trying to bring them back to their fitrah. And again, this is one of the things that converts will often see. I remember when I became a Muslim, I had to fast my first Ramadan. I'd never done that in my life. And like, am I going to be able to do that? Really? Not drink or eat from dawn to dusk? And I was really worried. And you know, the first day, you did it. And the second day, you did it again. And the third day, like, you know, I could do this all the time. But I remember, you know, this was 1970. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror and seeing my face change right there before me. It's like you're becoming a different person. And this is because you're coming into touch with your fitrah. You're purifying yourself. And that fitrah is light. And something is coming out of you that wasn't there before. You were dark, and now you're not dark. When we were in Spain years ago, we had a community that was attracting people. And it was quite effective in da'wah. And there was a man who was in the mountains to the south of Granada. He was from Madrid. This is just the post-Franco era. And so he'd become a Buddhist, he thought. And he was up in the mountains. He had this special suit he would wear that was black. It looked sort of like a wetsuit. And it would keep him warm so he didn't freeze at night. And he fasted all the time. And he had friends up there in the mountains, but they all became Muslims. And they came to us in Granada. And, you know, so he was frightening. I mean, his eyes were like, you know, they were popping out of his head. And he was very intense. And we had a madrasa. I taught there. And the madrasa, you know, it's like a Spanish Andalusian door, like a lot of Arab doors. So you have this little door that you can open and see who's outside, right? And so he knocked on the door because his friends had come, Muslims, he didn't have any friends. So he might as well see what we're doing. And the person, he knocked on the door, the person who opened the door shut it right away. It's like, oh my God, it's like Satan's out there. And then they were also saying that, and he knocks again, and he said, like, I want to come in, and I want to learn about Islam. And it's like, oh my God, it's like, we have enough nuts in the community as it is. And then he's going to come in too. You know, and he keeps knocking. And he comes in, and he wants to be told about Islam. And he took the shahada. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. It's like, we're going to all go crazy. And he took the name Uthman. And, you know, he changed from week to week. And if you saw him a month after he became a Muslim, you wouldn't recognize him. He was a different human being, a beautiful human being. And, you know, he had learned, you know, acrobatics. So he was an acrobat. And I had an office in this madrasa on the second floor, and I could look out my window to a beautiful garden. And I would look outside, and a lot of times I'd see him walking in the garden, and he couldn't take 2 steps without a huge acrobatic skip, like a ballerina. You know, and he was happy. And he became the servant of the community. Anything you wanted, he wanted to do it for you. You know, anything. To clean, to help you clean, to help you build, to do anything for you. So what is that? To me, these are the proofs that this is Deenul Fitrah. See, and so his coming into this religion brings him back to that beautiful person that he was created to be. And you would have never guessed that had you seen him before. Why is the Kaaba not referred to in Christianity or Judaism? Who said? Who said? you know, if you want to read the Bible, you know, especially looking for things like this, then you've got to read it in Hebrew. And in Hebrew, in the Psalms, there's a verse about Becca and about Abraham and Ishmael. You know, so be careful what you say. There are all kinds of things in the Bible, you know, that you would be surprised to learn about. You might be able to discover it reading the Bible in translation, but really you have to be able to read it in Hebrew. And, you know, then you'll find amazing things. However, there's no question that the Jews and Christians are presenting to you a very small part of what they actually had. So we know that from things like the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls, which we talked about before, were discovered shortly after World War II. They come to the light of the public around 1947. The Dead Sea Scrolls are amazing. And they were discovered in Wadi Qumran, which is a valley just north of the Dead Sea in Palestine, just before you go through a tunnel in the mountains to come to Jerusalem. So there's a big mountain range between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea, and Wadi Qumran is in that mountain range on the other side. It's very barren there. And the Dead Sea Scrolls community lived there about 70 years or so before Jesus. And they're very, very interesting. And they believed that they had the true teaching of Moses, and that they read the Torah the right way. يَتْلُونَهَا حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ يَتْلُونَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ. That they read it the correct way. And they have all sorts of amazing teachings, all sorts of books. And they believed that the Messiah was about to come. So they're awaiting the Messiah, and he did come relatively soon after that. And then they knew that he would be the sign of the coming of the great prophet of the end of time, who some scholars have described as the super prophet, the final prophet. And that prophet is what we call the Deuteronomy prophet 18:18. Deuteronomy, book 18, verse 18, right? And this is the prophet who God told Moses would be like him, and he would be from the midst of the brothers of Jacob, and he would guide them into all truth, and he wouldn't speak of his own, but he would speak only what God revealed to him. And that whatever he taught, they had to obey. And they had to support him and not oppose him. So this was the main belief of the Dead Sea Scrolls community. And they had lots of information about him. So the Bible itself, which is possibly what the person is thinking of, it represents a very small part of the tradition of the people of the book. In Surah Al-Baqarah, God begins by telling the Jews, addressing the Jews, in speaking of the story of the creation of Adam, and how the angels were commanded to prostrate to Adam, and how Satan refused to prostrate, right? Did you know that the most fundamental belief of Jewish theology and of the theology of the children of Israel in general is Adam Qadmun? It is Adam al-Qadim, meaning by that, Adam in the garden. And there they have the story with more detail than you have, of God's creating Adam, of Satan spiting Adam, of God's commanding the angels, and of the fall. and then the fall of Adam. This is the cornerstone of Jewish theology. And therefore, when you read Surah Al-Baqarah, which is addressed to the Jews of Medina, first and foremost, it's amazing that it begins with that story. And to them, it would have been a proof. So, as we said before, we've got to study. We've got to learn. Not all of us all the same thing. But we have to have scholars among us, men and women, who plunge into these things, who master Hebrew, who master Aramaic and Syriac and Greek. There's a lot to do. This is what Christians do. You've probably heard of the Gospel of Barnabas. Is it sahih? No, it's not. Meaning that we cannot establish its sihha. Just like if you had a hadith, it's a beautiful hadith, but it doesn't have a chain of transmission, you can't say it's sahih, can you? You have to have a chain of transmission. Well, the Gospel of Barnabas doesn't. And there are things in it that are strange. It was almost certainly a book used extensively in Andalusian da'wah. And it has a Spanish version, which is in a beautiful Castilian Spanish, and it has also an Italian version, which is in the Italian of Dante, of the age of Dante. So these were da'wah works. Should the book be studied? Of course it should be. We publish it and we want to go around saying that, this proves that we're correct and so forth. Well, a lot of Christians are not going to accept it, although it's very interesting. Who are the people who've studied the Gospel of Barnabas? Christians. How many Muslims? Oh, I know of one, and it's not a very good study. We just don't do those things, do we? We don't study. And the greatest study that I ever found is by a German biblical scholar. And he goes through it really carefully. And he contends that this is an interesting book. And that it has in it a core which must go back to early Christianity. And then he believes that other things have been added on. And he also shows that the Gospel of Barnabas almost certainly could not have been a product of Western Christianity. It had to come from the East. And this is really interesting. Really interesting. And now, you could maybe make some use of the Gospel of Barnabas based on that. It is the most complete story. Okay, but you have to study. You've got to do your homework. We've got to do that. And we have to have institutions that produce Muslims that are able to do that. You mentioned Islam in Al-Andalus. How do you think about a person who thinks that the Islamic futuhat were not the best thing? Would it have been better if Islam had spread at a time with peaceful methods? It would have never spread. It would have been killed and crushed and died. I'm sorry, that doesn't sound good, does it? But that's the truth. The sword is a noble instrument. And had we not used it, it was being used against us. And, so we didn't spread Islam with the sword in Ethiopia and in many places, but, we were the rivals of Byzantium and the Persian Empire. And again, the conquest of Spain, as I said, is one battle. It's one battle. And then Spain and Portugal give themselves to us, all of them. It's a beautiful story. And we are an ummah of conquerors. I'm not ashamed of that. And we were people who had rules of engagement. We were not killers. We did not massacre. We did not cut down trees or burn villages or rape and pillage. Okay, so let's be proud of that legacy. And today, who is there to defend us? Really? You've got to have strength. You know, what would Egypt be without an army? And are you ashamed of the Ramadan war? Are you ashamed of the fact that you pushed the Israelis back? I was here when that happened. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in my life. You know, and those of you who are older, I think you would agree that the Arabs, it's like each of them was carrying a millstone around their neck. They were weighed down and they were hopeless. And the Israelis had created this myth that they were invincible and that they knew everything and that they were superior to us in every way. And the Egyptians taught them a lesson. And I was there, and I was able to go see the Bar-Lev line. You know, and this was amazing. And the way they came, the way Egypt came to life after crossing the Suez Canal, I've never seen anything like that in my life. And that was a major victory. That was, and are you not proud of that? You know, so we live in a world where today we need peace. That's true. And in fact, we should pray for peace. And war has become an impossible alternative, you know, with these weapons that we have today. But, you know, what would Pakistan be without its army? And its army is one of the best in the world, one of the most professional. Egypt has a good army as well. What would the United States be without an army? You think the United States would disarm? Or that Russia would? You know, war happens to be one of the unfortunate, unescapable realities of life. So, you know, and jihad was the first requirement of Bani Israel. You know, it's not just us, you know, it was also for them as well. I want to study with you. That's not a question. What can I do? Well, that is a question. Study with me. That's the answer. Inshallah, may we be able to stay in touch with each other. And may we benefit from these days. And it's very wonderful to be with you. And I also express my thanks to all the people who have organized these beautiful evenings. And that's hard to do. And I express my thanks to you that you faithfully come out on these nights. And I know that a lot of you come from big distances, and God put blessing in us all together and enable us to grow and to get better and to learn. Ameen. Allahumma wafiqna lima tuhibbuhu wa tarda waj'alna min abidika as-su'ada wa ammitna ala kalimati al-huda. Alimna ma yanfa'una wa wafiqna lil-amali bima 'allamtana bih waj'al ma nahnu fihi خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. It's really wonderful to be with you, and I look forward to being with you again, inshallah, probably next year. I hope next year. I doubt that I'll be back this year. And for those who are coming to the Zawiya, we really look forward to being with you there too. Wassalamu alaikum.